What are you expecting? What are you preparing for here?
Well, I think you have to, be prepared for Donald Trump attempting to deport that many people. You never know with Donald Trump whether it's bluster. He said that we were going to build the wall and Mexico was going to pay for it. Of course, that didn't happen. There was actually very little of the wall that was built in his administration. Mexico definitely didn't pay for it. But this has been a fantasy of his, this mass deportation, for a while. And it's true that he has a team now around him with more experience and more know-how on how to get this done. Also control of all the levers of government now, and a Supreme Court that is more supportive of him. So there's already significant pushback from the ACLU, from other legal groups, providing services also to undocumented immigrants who are in the process of trying to become documented. I think there's going to be pushback from local police chiefs who don't want their police departments to become immigration agents because they feel like that's going to make communities less safe. And I agree with you all that to the extent that the administration sticks with a much more limited plan of people who are violent criminals, it was good to see justice for Laken Riley's family. I think people agree with that. If there's somebody who commits a crime like that, no matter what their status is, they should be punished for that. But I think when you get into, for instance, saying somebody that has a speeding ticket from 20 years ago, who otherwise is a productive, good member of a community, I don't think that's in the same category. And I also don't think that Dreamers, for instance, who've known no other country, should be deported. And that if he tries it, there's going to be a tremendous amount of blowback, not just from Democrats, but I think from even moderates and some Republicans.
Well, and this is a tough issue to sort of sort through politically if you're looking at Democrats and Republicans, because what is said on campaign trails often it does not match what happens in reality. And Donald Trump, he talked about building the wall. It was actually Lindsey Graham, and it was, I believe, John Cornyn. I want to get these names right, but there was one Republican senator after another Republican senator that said, building a wall is building a wall is not going to take care of the problem. That was in 17 and 18 when Republicans controlled Congress. But let's dig even deeper. People don't remember, Barack Obama was hammered by the Hispanic community, by Hispanic leaders, because he deported 2.1 million illegal immigrants, 90% of them, by the way, violent criminals. Donald Trump, if my count's right here, deported 1.2 million. And that wasn't for a lack of trying. Again, it's not just having the people on the ground to push the deportation. There's a million different things that have to go on.
It's interesting. Recently, Congressman Tony Gonzalez, that represents a good part of South Texas, including areas right along the border, mentioned that he had inquired into how many folks fit that bill of violent criminals, and that it was several 100,000. Mm-hmm. So the number that we're talking about is not 11 or 12 million. I mean, the vast majority of people who are here who are undocumented, yes, they may have come in and they broke the law when they came in, but they have been law-abiding, good, productive members, people that go to the same church, whose kids go to the same school, who, work and serve the community.
And by the way, can we also say, run family restaurant, help work, run family restaurants, make businesses work in a lot of these towns, main streets across America. At least this is, again, obviously, if they're violent criminals, if they're criminals that have committed serious crimes, I think 95% of Americans want them out. But if somebody's been here for 20 years, been a law-abiding citizen, I think that's when it gets more difficult politically for Republicans. For some, again, if we have the images that we saw in 2017, that is a political loser for any party that tries to do it.
Well, and if Donald Trump could deport couple 100,000 violent criminals, that gives him a win. It gives him plenty of images. It gives him, I've done this, I've delivered on a promise, and it doesn't muddle everything that he's done by taking it too far. And so I would use as the example of the counterexample, building the wall. Donald Trump didn't build the wall, but he built enough and he made an effort, and it showed his voters and Americans that he was trying, and they didn't penalize him for it. And so this could be the same kind of political deal. Get rid of violent criminals, deport them, but let's not deport hardworking citizens.
Yeah, two other things. One, if he goes a more retail approach, as you're suggesting, then you avoid a scenario where you have massive public protests. You then, as Rand Paul warned against, having to bring in the military potentially under the Insurrection Act, which would be terrible for American society and terrible for this institution, this successful institution known as the U.S. military. The other thing Rand Paul squeezed in his comment, which I think the Trump administration will do, is to revive the so-called Remain in Mexico program. We have a totally broken system where people come here, ask for asylum, and then they come in, and it might take 5-10 years for their asylum cases to be heard. We can't do that. So one of the most interesting negotiations.
Yeah, but what happens afterwards? They're told, go on and come back for a court hearing. Right. And how many come back?
We don't have numbers on that, but it's a very small percentage.
I'm guessing it's probably below 10%.
I'm guessing you're right. And in the meantime, people are here for 5-7 years. That's why, again, the negotiations between the new administration in Mexico to reestablish Remain in Mexico, that if you want to apply for asylum here, that's fine, but you sit in Mexico while your case is being adjudicated in the United States. The ability to get that reestablished will be a major, major immigration issue.
Jackie, many of the Republicans you cover on Capitol Hill every day were reelected on the issue of immigration. Voters saying that and the economy top of mind for them. So we heard Rand Paul draw some kind of a line in the sand for Donald Trump. Don't try to use the military. But what will be the posture of most Republicans as he pursues this mass deportation?
Yeah, Willie, before I get to that, I do want to jump on something that Richard noted, which is the law that gives the president this sort of limitless power to use the military domestically, the Insurrection Act. I would be remiss not to look back on our January 6th coverage, which is a handful of lawmakers and even some Republicans at the time who encouraged reforms to the Insurrection Act. Lawmakers do have some autonomy here, especially during this lame duck session, potentially, to get something through, to make some reforms, to try to curb Trump's limits and his ability to be able to use the military. And we know in the last administration, in his first administration, that he threatened several times over the course of his term to use the military in inappropriate ways, such as clearing protesters who were protesting George Floyd's murder, using the National Guard in a pretty violent way in Lafayette Square to clear protesters. So they do have some power here, but I do think you are going to see the majority of Senate Republicans not throw themselves into the crossfire here, not side with Rand Paul, who is notoriously dovish on some of these things and has a very, very libertarian view of the way that the military can be utilized domestically and internationally. But I do think that most Republicans, at the end of the day, they are a bit, they lean towards, I think, supporting some of the options outlined in that bipartisan border bill that was tossed to the wayside earlier this year. That, though, is unlikely to be resurrected now with incoming President-elect Trump.
All right, Jackie, thank you so much as always. We greatly appreciate it. Mr. Secretary, let me ask you, and also ask you, somebody who's mayor of San Antonio and who understands the region as you do, and I'm going to be talking about the border along the Texas border, Texas-Mexico border. I look at the election results, and for Democrats, I see bad news, not in Wisconsin or Michigan or Pennsylvania, the states we focus the most on, because Kamala Harris was, less than 1 point from beating Donald Trump in Wisconsin, about 1.5 points in Michigan, about 1.5 points in Pennsylvania. And Democrats won races for the Senate in Nevada, in Arizona, in Wisconsin, and in Michigan. All right, so those states are still up for grabs. Those states are still swing states. What I looked at on that map, and if I were a Democrat trying to figure out how to win next time, what would scare the hell out of me is, first of all, that Florida's gone now, but also Texas, a state where I think Democrats went from 13 points behind in 12 to 9 points behind in 16 to like 5 or 6 points behind in 20. And now they lost it. And what I keep going back to at that map is something you know so much better than anybody else. And that's all the counties along the border that used to be all blue, they are all red now. What do Democrats need to do differently if they want to win? Because if they're going to ever win Texas, they got to get, that's the first place they need to go and work, like next week.
Yeah. First of all, you have it right in terms of the trend in Texas. It was trending toward the middle over these last 10 years, and especially during the Trump era. And then we had this last election where it went in the other direction. I think a lot of things, I think for a long time, South Texas was taken for granted by Democrats. It was not invested in enough. It was assumed people show up and vote in the primary in March, and then, they're going to show up in November for Democrats. And so I think what you're going to see from the Texas Democratic Party is a lot more investment and attention down there in South Texas. I think part of it also is Trump. Whether it was Romney or other candidates, they didn't get this kind of response down there. And I think it's going to be hard for candidates in the future to replicate it. In other words, I don't take the Hispanic support down there as necessarily now they've turned into Republicans. I think they're still gettable.
It's like George W. Bush in 2004. He got 45% of the Hispanic vote.
Even Reagan in the 80s did fairly well back then with Latino voters. And so we've seen these spikes before, and the question is, for Democrats, what they're going to do to make sure that they get in there and they reach out. For Republicans, does it last? And are they going to get candidates that actually do the work to get in there and cement that? I believe that Democrats are going to be able to take back a good part of that. The exit polls range from overall the Latino vote going, I think, 53% for Harris to one last week said 62%. So Democrats still have Latinos in their column, but they absolutely have work to do to make sure that stays the case.
How much of that was Democrats not acknowledging that there was, in fact, a crisis on the border? That if you lived in El Paso, Democrat or Republican, you saw with your own eyes the impact it was having on your community every day, and you saw an administration for a long time, frankly, not doing anything about it.
Well, I think it did have an effect, no doubt. Also because those areas, I think that they cleave along some of the lines that we've seen more generally in the Trump era. For instance, those areas are more rural, small-town areas. Those are the kinds of areas that have trended more toward Trump, whether they're largely Latino or white or other. And so, yes, the border played a role, no doubt, and Republicans made a lot of that in the last 2 years. But I don't think that it's a case where Democrats can't go back and recover some of that ground.
Former San Antonio Mayor, HUD Secretary Julian Castro, so great to have your perspective this morning. Thanks so much. See you soon.
Thank you.